Hello students, today we are going to learn on the topic item 17 of the head and neck card. So this item is actually of the X-ray of the head and neck region. So without further ado, let's begin. So this is the X-ray of the skull and paranasal sinus. So when we will see the X-ray, we will say that this is the plain X-ray of skull with paranasal sinus occipitomental view. And this X-ray is showing the frontal sinus, the for orbital cavity, the oral cavity, the maxillary sinus, and alveoli with sockets for root of the teeth. We can also see in this X-ray the mandible rami and temporomandibular joint. So, if we see in this X-ray that we can see that this is the orbital cavity, this is the oral cavity, this is the nasal cavity, and we will see many sinuses like this is the frontal sinus, this is the sphenoidal sinus, and this is the maxillary sinus here. Okay. Also, we can see that there are alveoli for the sockets for the root of the teeth, and in there we can see the mandible. It's in the behind part. And obviously we can see the temporomandibular joint, which is not that much of visible in this X-ray. Now a clinical question is that the maxillary sinus, you see, so when this maxillary sinus, when they will be a little bit wide, there will be a little bit of haziness, this maxillary sinus will indicate there is maxillary sinusitis. So the question may arise like this, that what is the clinical change in this X-ray? So the clinical change, if there is haziness or more whitish over here, then you can see that you can say that maxillary sinusitis has occurred. Another clinical question which may come, that is from obviously the paranasal sinus, that where does the paranasal sinus opens, and what are the function of the paranasal sinus, like what is the function of the maxillary sinus. And now let's study of the X-ray of the skull from the lateral view. When we will see this X-ray, we can say that this is the plain X-ray of the skull lateral view, showing lateral wall of the nose with the nasal cavity, oral cavity with the sockets of the root of the teeth, some air sinus like sphenoidal air sinus, frontal air sinus, and you can see there is maxillary air sinus which is behind the nasal cavity, and also the mandible, the temporomandibular joint, and vertebrae. So an important question over here is the count of the vertebrae. Okay, so you have to count the vertebra. So you can see this is the cervical 1, then this is the cervical 2, cervical 3, 4, 5. Okay, so you have to count from above to downwards. Now another question that may come, that in the cervical vertebrae, which vertebra is typical and which vertebra is atypical, right? And also in case of the cervical vertebra 1 and cervical vertebra 2, why these vertebrae are atypical, and why, what is the importance of this vertebra? Okay, you already know that, and you know that the cervical vertebra 1's spine is straight, and why this is straight, you have to tell the importance. And cervical 2 vertebral body, this is the dens, you can see why the dens is very important. Okay, so these are important questions for the X-ray.